It was supposed to be a quiet weekend just me, some lumber, and the plan I'd drawn up years ago, to finally build the floating dock on the lake behind my cabin. The lake, my lake, was the centerpiece of my property, secluded, glassy, and untouched by the madness of the outside world. The land around it was deeded to me, every inch of it, legally transferred from my grandfather decades ago. And yet, somehow, the HOA thought it had a say. The problem began the moment I backed my trailer up near the shoreline. My wife, Claire, handed me a thermos of coffee, and our golden retriever, Max, barked excitedly, as if sensing we were about to start something big. I smiled, not knowing how right that would be. The first few hours were peaceful. I laid the foundation posts, measured the angles with care, and admired the early morning mist burning off the water. But right as I started to install the flotation barrels, I noticed a white SUV creeping along the tree line. I recognized it instantly. It was HOA President Karen Bellamy's vehicle, plastered with a big community crest and the words "Authorized Oversight" in gold letters. She parked on the access path, stepped out with a clipboard, and marched toward me like she was storming a beach. "You can't build that," she barked. "This lake is shared community property, and any structures require approval." I straightened up, wiped my hands, and calmly pointed to the posted sign nailed to a tree. "Private property trespassers will be prosecuted." Karen ignored it, flipped open her folder, and started reading HOA ordinances about shoreline aesthetics, structural integrity, and visual harmony. I waited until she finished. "Karen," I said, "this lake isn't part of the HOA. I own this land, and I own the water. Here's the deed." I handed her a laminated copy I kept in my tool chest just in case. Her face turned red as she scanned it, flipping pages like they might suddenly say something else. "This must be a mistake," she hissed. "You can't own a whole lake." "I do," I replied. "And you're trespassing." She stormed off without another word. I figured that would be the end of it. But less than an hour later, 2 sheriff's deputies pulled up the gravel road. They were polite, but confused. "We got a call about illegal construction and possible environmental violations," one said. I handed them the same deed and permits from the county. They nodded, apologized, and left. But Karen wasn't done. Over the next 3 days, she filed 4 noise complaints, alleged I was damaging protected wetlands, and tried to block my hardware delivery at the front gate. Claire and I documented everything. We installed motion cameras, recorded every interaction, and forwarded each bogus claim to our attorney. But Karen escalated. One evening, we returned from town to find orange warning signs stapled to the dock. CC Construction immediately pending investigation. They were fake. No agency was listed. No signature. Just her name at the bottom. That was the last straw. I drove straight to the county recorder's office the next morning. They confirmed my deeds, water rights, and most importantly, that the HOA's jurisdiction stopped well before my lakefront. I got everything notarized and requested a public declaration clarifying the HOA's boundaries. In the meantime, I resumed work, this time with a local reporter filming a story on...
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
Resumed work, this time with a local reporter filming a story on HOA overreach. Karen didn't like that. She arrived mid-interview, waving papers and screaming about public trust waterways and irresponsible behavior. The cameraman caught it all: her insults, the threats, even her attempt to snatch the microphone. That footage went viral. By the end of the week, my phone was ringing off the hook. Reporters, lawyers, even a state senator's aide called, curious about how an HOA had tried to steal a private lake. But it didn't end there. The HOA board held an emergency meeting. They tried to retroactively vote the lake into their domain, citing a decades-old survey that turned out to be fraudulent. I obtained the original maps, showed the surveyor's corrections, and had my attorney file an injunction preventing further harassment. Karen doubled down. She began sending private security to monitor activity on my land. One of them tried to detain a plumber I hired to lay a line for a dock shower. That led to an assault charge and a restraining order against the HOA's hired goons. I sent the footage to the sheriff. The deputies, who were by now familiar with Karen's antics, warned her that the next false call would land her in jail. But the turning point came when I received an anonymous tip. A former HOA treasurer emailed me documents showing that Karen had used HOA funds to file her bogus environmental reports and hire security. She had overstepped her authority, and now I had proof. My lawyer, the county prosecutor, and a few good neighbors helped me prepare the ultimate response. We filed a formal complaint, initiated a community-wide audit, and launched a lawsuit for harassment, trespassing, and defamation. Karen tried to rally support, but most neighbors were tired of her dictatorship. In a surprise vote, the board dissolved itself. The HOA was dead. On the day I finished my dock, Claire and I sat on its edge, watching the sun set over the water. Max splashed nearby, and the lake shimmered with golden light. It had taken weeks of stress, legal battles, and public exposure, but we had won. And the best part, we didn't just get a dock, we got our freedom back. But as we sat there, watching that reflection ripple under a cotton candy sky, I realized the dock wasn't just wood and nails, it was a symbol, a declaration. I could feel the tension finally leaving my shoulders, and when Claire leaned her head on mine, it felt like we'd reclaimed more than land, we'd reclaimed peace. We decided to host a dock day, inviting every neighbor who had quietly stood with us. Over 24 families showed up, most with potluck dishes and lawn chairs. We shared stories, ate barbecue, and launched paddleboards into the now-famous lake. People laughed freely again, not worried about some clipboard tyrant snooping around. One neighbor brought framed copies of my deed as a gag gift, and someone else made t-shirts that said I survived the HOA war. Even the sheriff came by, off-duty, just to shake my hand. And for the first time in years, I saw genuine community, not control, not fear, but unity. Claire and I walked the shoreline together that evening, and when we reached the far side of the lake, she smiled at me and asked, "What are we going to build next?" I told her maybe it was time to build a community garden near the water's edge, something for the kids, for families. Not because we had to, but because we could. Because freedom built from truth always blooms. And that lake, quiet and vast, would remember. If I thought peace would last, I was mistaken. No sooner had the dock become the crown jewel of my lake than whispers started creeping back into the community. While the HOA board had officially dissolved after Karen's disgraceful exit, a small splinter group, led by her equally overbearing cousin, Martha, was already scheming to reclaim what they still foolishly, quote, considered community property. It started innocuously enough. One morning, I noticed flyers stapled to neighborhood signposts that read, "Public Lake Access Town Hall Discussion Pending." The flyer bore no legal seal, no organizing body, just a bold title and a poorly photoshopped image of my lake. When I tore one down and examined it more closely, I recognized the font and layout. Martha had been the self-appointed communications director for the old HOA. I wasn't the only one disturbed. My neighbor Steve, a quiet Vietnam vet with a cabin tucked up near the ridgeline, showed up on my porch later that day holding 3 of the same flyers. They were stapled to my mailbox. He said grimly, "Want me to start watching the roads again?" I thanked him and said not yet. But something told me this wasn't going to be just passive noise. Martha had always resented the fact that I'd won in court. She thought of me as a troublemaker, someone who had dismantled what she called the backbone of the neighborhood. And now, she wanted her revenge. I was ready this time. The moment those flyers appeared, I sent scanned copies to my lawyer James and my contact at the county zoning board. Neither agency recognized any official meeting or petition, which meant it was all bluff again. But bluffing can be dangerous when the wrong people start to believe it. The following week, a group of strangers showed up on the edge of my property. City folks, clearly misled, wandering around with coolers and inflatables, thinking they had found a public lake. I intercepted them at the dock, politely informed them they were trespassing, and showed them the sign, the deed, and a printed copy of the court ruling. One man was reasonable and apologetic. The others grumbled but left. Later that day, I discovered that Martha had set up a website titled communitylakenow.org, complete with donation buttons and a Make the Lake Public campaign. She wasn't just trying to stir the pot, she was fundraising off lies. James moved quickly. He drafted a cease and desist letter and filed a complaint against the website's domain registrar. But even as the legal gears turned, Martha grew bolder. She scheduled a public meeting in the town rec centre and handed out petitions at the local grocery store. The petition had over 200 signatures, none of which lived within 5 miles of our community. Meanwhile, Claire and I kept strengthening our legal shield. We posted new boundary signs, improved our fencing, and reinstalled the motion cameras. One night, the footage captured Martha herself creeping around with a flashlight, taking photos of our dock like some property paparazzi. That video made it to our lawyer and eventually to the sheriff's department. The final straw came when Martha showed up with 2 men dressed in reflective vests, claiming to be county inspectors. They demanded access to the dock, citing structural review protocols. I asked for identification. They refused. I called the sheriff. Turns out, they weren't inspectors, they were friends of Martha's from a private construction firm. They were charged with impersonating public officials. That day, I filed a second harassment suit. But I didn't stop there. With the evidence we'd compiled trespassing footage.
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.
Stop there. With the evidence we'd compiled trespassing footage, fundraising fraud, impersonation reports, I submitted a formal request to the county commissioner to rezone the lake and its surrounding perimeter as an enclosed core, private recreational easement. This designation would not only reinforce the boundaries of my property, but permanently block any future attempt to annex or claim the lake under public domain. It worked. The commissioner, tired of HOA drama and with public sentiment behind me, signed the request. My lake was now legally recognized as a protected private zone. Any future encroachments would be considered criminal acts. I installed a new plaque on the dock, brushed steel, engraved, "Privately owned waters protected by state registry." Claire smiled when she saw it. "Think this will keep them away?" she asked. I nodded. "It'll do more than that. It'll remind them what happens when you mess with the truth." And that's what it was really about, truth. They had twisted it, weaponized it, and tried to drown me in bureaucracy and noise. But in the end, the truth floated. Strong. Steady. Just like the dock I built with my own hands. We didn't stop there. Inspired by the overwhelming support from neighbors, I decided to hold a lakeside open house-a-not for the public, but for those who'd stood with me through the chaos. Steve helped hang lanterns on the newly finished posts, and Claire cooked enough chili to feed a battalion. One by one, families arrived, bringing desserts, lawn chairs, and good stories. It became a celebration of ownership, resistance, and dignity reclaimed. A few veterans from Steve's unit even came up from out of state to visit. They saluted the dock like it was a ship, and toasted the lake with solemn respect. By late evening, I noticed something beautiful. Where once fear had taken hold, community now bloomed. There was laughter, music, the crackle of a bonfire. And in those soft moments, with the water shimmering under firelight and the sounds of unity all around, I realized we had transformed not just the landscape, but the legacy of our town. The HOA no longer held sway. The lake stood, untouchable, a beacon of what's possible when you fight back with integrity. Martha never recovered her influence. The lawsuits went public. The media circled again this time, broadcasting how her manipulation had nearly sparked a legal wildfire. Her website was shut down, her allies scattered, and her name became synonymous with overreach and failure. Meanwhile, our lake became a local legend not for its beauty alone, but for the story it carried. A story of resistance, rights, and redemption. After the final ruling, I decided to invest in an educational program for property rights awareness, teaming up with James and the local university. We hosted workshops by the lake, turning my property into a case study on boundary law, HOA abuses, and rural land ownership. The sheriff even dropped by as a guest speaker, outlining how Martha's tactics almost created civil unrest. The lectures filled fast. Attendees came from towns 2 counties over, wanting to know how I managed to dismantle a rogue HOA machine with just a dock, a deed, and a spine. And in the heart of every session, I'd bring them down to the dock. I'd tell them how it started not with lawsuits or politics, but with the decision to build something of my own, to stand firm when others tried to steal it. The floating dock wasn't just timber and nails. It had become a singular foundation not just for my property, but for truth itself.